Whānau no mai, hoki mai ki te kāpura o te wānanga, and our next Pae Kōrero are a very special whānau. Hope you fellas have had a good kai. I certainly did. Kai o te kōrero, kai o te rangatira, ko tātou e pai nei. Nau mai hoki mai ki tō tātou ātea o Toi Tangata, and what amazing hākari of kōrero, mātauranga and wānanga across the three awhi. Over the past 2 days, we've heard from knowledge holders, researchers, practitioners, whānau and leaders who have challenged us to think differently about hauora, learning, connection and our responsibilities to one another. As we move into our final panel, we turn our attention to the people who live this kaupapa every day, our whānau of Toi Tangata. The Toi Tangata Kaimahi panel brings this together. Members of the team who work across communities, kura, organisations and whānau throughout Aotearoa. Te mahi sits at the heart in the intersection of mātauranga Māori, systems change, physical activity, kai Māori, research, rangahau, wellbeing and environmental connection. This panel is an opportunity to hear reflections from those who have been walking alongside these kaupapa on the ground, what they are seeing and what they are learning, what is shifting and what gives them hope for the future. Throughout this hui, we've been reminded that the meaningful change happens through relationships, collective action, and a willingness to walk together through challenges and uncertainties. Nē tō tātou tāhuhu tērā. Our kaimahi carry these lessons into their daily practice, helping to create spaces where people can connect with themselves, each other, and the environments that sustain us. As we reflect on our kaupapa, he Waewae Taumaha, he Kiri Mākū, this panel invites us to consider not only where we have come from, but where we are heading and what we are being called to carry forward. Nō reira, e te whānau, please join me in welcoming our Toi Tangata Kaimahi panel, Haylee Koroi, Chelsea, Cunningham, Chrissy Hilton, and our kaiwhakahaere matua, Darrio Penetito-Hemara. Kia ora e te whānau.
Nā koe hoa.
Kia ora.
All right. Tō tika tiki ngā kōrero ne. The theme speaks to carrying responsibility, enduring challenges, and working for future generations. Ka pai. What does he Waewae Taumaha, he Kiri Mākū mean to each of you in the context of your mahi, and most especially in the context of he Toi Tangata?
O tērā pia ka timata I konei. Mihi ana kia tātou, tēnā koe te tuakana, katai te pātai ko tērā. I guess often, ko te mea tuatai whakaaro here, Ao, is that we often truly don't know what people are carrying. What are the burdens and the obligations that our whānau have across the motu and within our team at Toi Tangata. And so, you know, we're pretty fortunate amongst our team to have some tohunga from multiple spaces. He pauwaru e tahi, he kaikaranga e tahi, he kanuhi kitea ki ngā marae, ki ngā kaupapa katoa. And I think it's one of those kaupapa kōrero that often reverts me back to thinking about what does the balance look like within in an environment where you do have obligations Māori nei, ki ngā kaupapa katoa. He hui mate, he hui ora, he kaupapa ki ngā tōpito katoa, ka pēhea mātou e whakawhānui, o tira I te wā orite whakawhāiti te aronga o mātou nei kaupapa. So I guess in the context of my mahi specifically, there's connection to governance, to management, to operations, to communications. There's a lot of different factors involved in that. But at the end of the day, ko tō mātou kia aro kia pehe ki te pīkau pia I ngā taumahatanga o mātou nei whānau puta noi I te motu, kia whai wāhi rātou ki te whaiwhai I taua ora. And I think what sort of comes or stems from that within, I guess, the context of my space is often thinking about how do we navigate the space where our whānau are actually being able to come along on the haerenga to ensure that they are looked after. And it probably leads me back to a couple of pātai that I've sort of asked myself on the time which is how much is too much? You know, in terms of our giving to our kaupapa, where we're putting ourselves into a space of becoming māwiwi in each of our spaces. So I can hand on heart say that me tohu te nuinga o te wā ki te māria o Toi Tangata, and that's myself included. I get told off by some of the whānau that we prioritise some of our things too much in our work setting. So it's really nice and refreshing to have a whānau or a kāhui kaimahi who are willing to step in for each other when it's necessary. So tērā pia, ka waiho ki reira hei timatanga noiho. Pretty lucky to have, I guess I refer to them as the Avengers all the time, our whānau at Toi Tangata, that are just willing to do what's necessary for our whānau. And so it's just striking the balance between those two. I roto i taku nei whakaaro.
I might just jump in after that. I've been thinking about this for a little bit, and I suppose there's lots of ways that you can approach the whakatauki. But I wanted to think about it from a kai perspective. And I think tuatahira, he Waewae Taumaha, he Kiri Mākū, you have to actually be in a place to even feel your own body. And that's like, I think so many of us are moving from a place of disembodiment. And I don't say that with any kind of moral judgment or anything like that. Just that, like, in order to feel that there's a taumaha, you have to be with your body. You have to show up alongside your tinana. And I think in like Western models of health, there's a lot of prescription. Like in Western nutrition, it's like this is what's good for you. And I think that can kind of pull us out of the opportunity that kai presents, regardless of what the kai is, to give us information about how we're feeling in the moment, how kai makes us feel, what it might indicate to us about what we need more broadly. And I think rather than, seeing that opportunity through kai, we kind of, in some instances, kind of see kai as a nuisance to our day. It's kind of like the thing that we shove into our mouth to get onto the next thing. And we kind of miss that opportunity to come back to the body and to feel the taumaha that we might be experiencing. So, yeah, I think through our teaching this year, we talk about kai as whanaunga, and how do we move away from this binary of food as good and bad, as good or bad, and remember that through our whakapapa, kai comes first as tuakana and he whanaunga ke. Nō reira, me pehea e whai whakaaro ki tērā āhuatanga. How do we think of kai and take our opportunities to eat as like moments of whanaungatanga that bring us back to the body? Yeah.
Ora. Yeah, and just picking up this beautiful ethereal voice that is coming from the ether is Haylee. I'm gonna get Adrian, our brother tech whiz, to chuck her face up, replace mine, because koinei ngā kai kōrero. Kia ora. Tēnā koe, tēnā kaurua. Tuahine mā, do you have anything else to add to that, pātai?
Kia ora tātou. Hei tāpiritanga no tāku. I guess for the mahi that I do, in the spaces that I'm privileged enough to be amongst and be a part of, in terms of the kaupapa matua, probably speaks quite prominently to the things that we do in Maurako and Te Taha Korikori. I guess in that sense, we speak about heavy feet in the spaces that we're in, especially for Mātaio. This can look at like our commitment and our persistence and our willingness to stand firm in providing a space where our mātauranga Māori can actually be obtained and how it can be practically applied by those who have the privilege of learning what we get to learn in Mātaio. In terms of Kiri Mākū, the wet skin, we could look at that as reflecting more of the immersement of the reality of our communities. For us here, te hunga noho taone nei, it's quite different to our korikori, per se. If we were to go out into the taiao, it's quite different to what it would be for our whānau who live close, or who live more closely to our whakapapatais, our maunga, our awa, our waka. So what does that look like for us here, for those who live in town, and what are the observations that we could potentially provide our communities in learning about, and seeing the huaranga, what are the catalysts that we can provide for our community within this space. For us as Toi Tangata, I know moku ake, for me personally, I feel like it's a reminder as well that wellbeing isn't just achieved through providing programs or kaupapa for the community. It's about those hononga, the relationships and the trust that we build with our community and our whānau, and the intentions behind those relationships, showing up consistently for them, hei kanohi kitea, listening also. Sometimes what we might perceive as a kaupapa for them might not actually be something that that they're wanting. So understanding how what can be the hahurunga, what can be the taututu between the reciprocation between us and our whānau. Ai, kona tāku.
Charles P. Hau te koe.
Kia ora whānau. I think the whakatauki actually sits well because it doesn't romanticize our mahi. It kind of acknowledges the weight of it, and then says go do it anyway and do it well. And I think that's a pretty spot on description of what kaupapa Māori mahi actually feels like a lot of the time. My mahi, super meaningful and I love it. And my two big kind of kaupapa, particularly at the moment, are Growing the Puna, our student internship, and Te Manunui, which is our Toi Tangata journal, which is soon to be released. But both of them are pretty different in terms of where they're at. With Growing the Puna, I stepped into the role with it having a pretty solid foundation built from the mahi of Kelly and Crystal. So there was something to stand on, and I'm super grateful for that. They'd done all the mahi before I even got there. Whereas the Toi Tangata journal is a different kind of challenge. We've kind of had to build a publishing infrastructure from the very beginning, with my little experience around publishing. But I knew that those systems and processes had to be designed, had been designed largely for academia, which carries a very strong Western lens. So what I wanted to make sure was that we found a way through that while holding the responsibility of doing it differently in a way that genuinely honours the people who trust us with their mātauranga and their stories. And yeah, there've been many, many learnings along the way, but at the end of all of that, I'm grateful because every challenge has taught us something that we can add to our kete. And you just keep moving because the contribution to the mahi, the contribution that the mahi makes to our people will always outweigh the challenges. And I think the whakatauki gives us permission to acknowledge that the mahi can be hard, but without using it as a reason to stop or make excuses about it. And I also think, the whakatauki reminds us that well-being is active, it's relational, and it's lived. And it happens when we participate in life rather than simply observe it.
Tahua. Love that. And hey, we have a bit of a whakatauki or kiwaha up here in Te Tai Tokero. That's kind of like the Nike, just do it. Yeah, mahi a te mahi. Mahi a te mahi he oranga mo te iwi. Okay, ka pai. Kia ora koutou i rā whakaro. Te tai atu pātai. What are the biggest pressures facing whānau wellbeing that you're seeing? And where do you see the greatest opportunities for change?
Tērā pia ka whakaro ki ngā taumāhatanga o te wā, and I think it comes back to that whakaro around obligation that I sort of said that our whānau, probably one of the big things that we've tried to tell ourselves within the Toi Tangata team is, what did we say? Say no this tau, and we're still not doing it. And so I think, you know, I roto I tērā, ka whakaro mo te māria katoa ngā taumahatanga rereke o ia wāhi o ia tōpito. You know, our whānau that are still doing a lot of the whawhai to make sure that, you know, e tia ki tonu ana I o mātou nei whenua. E whawhai I wainga nui I ngā kaupapa kāwanatanga, e porotehi ana mo ngā kaupapa maha kia whai oranga o mātou uri whakaheke. And so I think there's this combination of wero for those who they're less fortunate to be connected to their ahurea, to their reo, to their arero Māori, and are constantly finding pathways to make sure that they can start to build on actually acquiring those things to really connect in these spaces. So when I think about belonging amongst our whānau, there's multiple places to do that, and our whānau find it wherever they can find it. And I think that's one of the things that's often seen in a Western paradigm as a space of, I guess, a little bit of separatism in the space in terms of thinking about how we actually navigate a space of being able to challenge wero, but think about the ways in which we can do that. So, you know, we think about the kawanatanga I tēnei wā, our whānau, not voting for multiple reasons. And there's a big shift, I think, in the younger generation who really see the importance in that, really is trying to push that our whānau pōti, and that it's actually really crucial for us to be able to ensure that what happens in this next rollout of government is actually something that's actually able to be controlled, I guess, by those who sort of seem like they can't control other things. And it sort of speaks to the Pae Kōrero that Emalani shared in her little workshop, which is about the radical hope, and hoping, but also finding a way to ensure that the hope that you're searching for, you're doing things to track towards that becoming a reality. And so when I think about the challenges in this space, we think about financial, we think about the well-being of our whānau, of our whenua, for example. So a lot of our, you know, our whānau are doing everything they can to make sure that their whenua that they are from or are living on are actually places that can prosper and continue to be thriving. And it takes one storm for that to sort of go back to a square one, but our whānau are still there and they're always going to be there. And so I think it's one of those whakaro in terms of wero that are just continuing to pile up in front of Ngāi Māori, but we're such a resilient iwi, tangata nei, to ensure that, you know, aha ko te aha, ko te apōpō o ngā uri whakaheke te mea matua. So every little incremental change that can happen across our kaupapa will provide, I guess, some real depth for our whānau to see not only the challenges, but what are the potential solutions to those challenges that can allow us to carry into a next generation. And when I talk about that, it's not the physically carrying on your shoulders, but just being able to takoha what you have acquired in terms of mātauranga to the next generation that's coming through. And I see that as a real intergenerational thread between our kōrero tuku iho shared this morning, yesterday, and how we're able to find different ways to relay that mātauranga and people to embody and whakatinana what that sort of looks like. So he nui ngā kaupapa I mua te aroaro, engari e whakaaro nui ana te māria kia pēhia e koke whakamua.
Miki.
Kia
Yeah.
ora, Charles, kia koe toa.
Hello, mai. I kind of along the same lines of the around the sense of belonging. I do think one of our biggest challenges is disconnection. Many whānau are carrying super significant pressures, financial stress, housing challenges, increasing demands in their time and energy. But alongside those pressures, I think we're also seeing a growing disconnection from many things that we know for a fact support our well-being, which is connection to whānau, culture, whenua, community, and even opportunities for movement and kore. Well-being is so deeply rooted and connected to identity and belonging. And of course, so when we know who we are and where we come from and how they connect to the wider world, we can provide the strongest foundation for well-being. And I guess one of the privileges in being a kaimahi for Toi is that we often get to engage and hear from communities and whānau all around the motu. And I think whānau don't necessarily need more programs. They just need stronger opportunities to reconnect with each other, with culture, and with places that hold meaning for them. And I think for me, many of our well-being challenges are not simply health challenges, they're challenges of connection and belonging and collective well-being. So I think the opportunity I see is in knowledge and story and the infrastructure that we're building to make sure that mātauranga doesn't just exist, but it circulates and it reaches people and it's treated as legitimate and valuable knowledge as well. But yeah, the pressures are very much real, but so is momentum when it gets going. And I think if we stay connected to our people, our mātauranga, and to each other, I think that's where change lives. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, kia ora. Anybody else want to jump in there?
Probably just another tāpiri, without repeating what Dar and Charles have already said, which was everything. Yeah, probably just hei whakakōpani ake i ngā kōrero te tokorua nei. Tētahi whakatauki, one whakatauki that comes to mind as they were speaking, and that pertains to the pātai that you asked us, Kawiti, was from one of the tohunga from Taranaki, Saniwaru. Tētahi o ana mātāpono toa, one of his principles that we were privileged enough to get taught was mā te whiua te mamai, mā te ngaua te kuru, kia tai ai e koe te kite i te tika, which also means, a gem cannot be polished without friction. Same as, obviously, when you get hit, you feel the mamai. So it's obviously within the challenges where we're able to see what the hua is going to be, what the hua ora is going to be within the challenge, and how we can, all of the interconnectedness of everything that we, in terms of our well-being, how we can get past them. But yeah, kona taku rima heneti.
He rima heneti tino nui te raiwa, I te mea, ki au nei, me he mea tātou ka titiro ki tēnei ao e noho nei tātou. I was just saying, the 5 cents is quite a profound 5 cents. When we think of paradigms and this like universal lesson of like you literally have to feel pain, feel the burn, feel experientially something for growth. ne, for the goodness, like going to the gym. It's not a comfortable process tēnei mea te ako me te tupu. But I just reflect as you're saying it, like the importance of how our tamariki learn through experience and through making mistakes. And we live in a paradigm where you kind of get spoon-fed answers. Everything's predetermined for you. And like, for me, moku ake goes so far as to me mea ka whakaro ki te hahi, ki ngā akoranga o te hahi, karaiti ana, e mea ana rā, like this idea of utu versus forgiveness, and how that underpins quite a lot. Like, I might be going off on a bit of a tangent, but mō tātou e rongo ana i ngā, like, kei hea te whakautu, kei hea te oranga. There's a little bit of he mate kei roto i te complacency sometimes. He mate kei roto i te hia kia ngā wari tō ao. And I was really reminded of the things that we can reach out to and the tools that we can reach out to from our tupuna, and what Paparirato was talking about this morning, to help assist te rongo i te taumaha, te rongo i te ngau o te kuru, aua tuahuatanga katoa, kei roto i te taiao. Anyway, sorry, little rant, but I love that the answers and the tauira kei te taiao tonu. Nō reira, taiao, mātauranga tuku iho. How does mātauranga Māori help us understand well-being differently from the dominant systems many of us navigate every day? I tēnei ao huri e noho nei tātou. Kind of what I was segueing into with that little rabbit hole.
Mākū e whakatuwhera pia. So I think just extending on what I mentioned before, so within Western nutrition, the whole logic that underpins that science and Western science generally is the idea that you can look at a kai objectively, that all kai is kind of the same, and it just consists of different ratios of fats and carbohydrates and proteins. And like, so the idea of objectifying something is that you see it devoid of any relations. So it doesn't matter how it's related, it doesn't matter where it's come from, it doesn't matter who's harvested it. What it is what it is, like in its tangible sense. And I think for mātauranga Māori, we know that through whakapapa, through whanaungatanga, we know that how kai relates to its relations is like fundamentally important. So like the way that kai grows through the whenua, the way that it's watered by its companion plants, the people that grow it, all of that is fundamentally important to how it can make us well. And not only as individuals, but how that system as a whole can convey a mauri. And I think one thing that is really important for me about the realization that mātauranga Māori depends on so many relations is that many people get to know, they get to claim to know things. We get to know things about our own bodies and our relationship with kai, and growers get to claim to know things about the food that they grow. And, the whenua gets to claim to know things as well. Whereas within Western nutrition, there are particular people that we hold up as knowers, and they kind of get to have the last say ultimately about what is tika. And so, yeah, I think mātauranga Māori offers that we are all knowers within our own worlds, and we can, affect change within that knowing.
Kia ora hoa. Pēnā hoki ki te puna mātauranga ai. Mā te wai o ia tāngata e whāngai te puna. E tahi atu whakaro?
Ka kuku atu ai. Ko tētai i rongo i roto i te kōrero a e Malani, nā te oho mai te tahi o mātou kaimahi kōrero here, that the kōrero in our kōrero tuku iho, in our waiata, in our taku, and in the oli that she shared, was that the kōrero, ancient but very familiar, much like the sound of rainfall, is what Te Ao Mai sort of talked about, and it sort of prompted the whakaara around te hononga ki te tai ao, as you said, tuakana before, around ko tō mātou he aro ki era akoranga ki roto i tēnā wahi, much like what Haylee is sort of talking about in terms of the hononga in each of those spaces. And ki au nei, ko te whakaaro roto i tēnā, like, wai Māori e mātou i ngā tohunga. Tērā rea ngā kua pūrākau tia i nai nei, just recently, some of our tohunga, you know, ko haere ki tua o te ārai, engari kua tino whakatakoto he tuāpapa hira i roto i tō rātou wā. And I think so that sharing of mātauranga in multiple ways has sort of allowed us the opportunity via kohanga, via kura, via whare wānanga, via whare tutaua, via all the different avenues that we got now. And, you know, ke te wānanga a hiko mātou i nai nei. So I think there's been a long time in terms of us being able to acquire and distribute, and something along the lines of what was shared this morning with Whai Awhitia, and that she would never have thought to share a hiko nei, that kind of mātauranga. But I haere ia ki tua o te ārai, ki te kōrero ki ngā tohunga o nehe, and I whakai rātou, tukua. And I think that's kind of one of the things that I am sort of leaning into in terms of what supports the way in which not only Toi Tangata functions, but the way in which we try to support our hapori across the motu, and ensuring that, you know, ko ngā pānga ki ngā tōpito katoa, ngā tuāhuatanga katoa, ka whakatakoto hia i tētahi wāhi matua, where people feel safe to be able to acquire mātauranga, but also able to share it in a way that allows us to ensure it keeps its authenticity, and that our whānau who are on the receiving end are in a position to be able to, I guess, really take in the mātauranga in a way that it should be taken in. So, you know, the discussion around programs and initiatives, and here's a flyer, and ana he puka puka pānuitia, engari, you know, ko ngā kōrero nehe ko ngā kōrero a waha nei, ko he takutaku, he mōtiatia, wera tuahuatanga. So, I think ko tētahi o ngā mea I whakaaro here o roto I tēnei, is that our mātauranga just holds the keys to the world, to the universe. And it's just about being in a space where you're comfortable enough to be on the receiving end, but also on the end of being able to share that mātauranga. So for a lot of our whānau, it's that permission piece of going, are we allowed to share this? And that's a real something that Toi Tangata takes really seriously in terms of what we do share. Ka kore e rawa e tono atu tētahi kaupapa ki te kore whakai, rātou kua tākoha mai te kaupapa. And so for Whai Awhitia to be able to say tukua I roto I tēnā, probably speaks to the way in which our Māori nei, we're protecting and we're progressing, and we're making sure that our kaupapa kōrero and all of our whakapapa is enduring. Mō ake.
Whū hara mai. He kōrero apiti tā te tahi atu?
Yep. Just as Dar was speaking and talking about Whai Awhitia, if you know Whai Awhitia, you know, she shares things, and sometimes she'll share things, from those that have passed on. And as we were being told of the kōrero that she shared with Dar around the taku, he hokinga mahara tērā, ki tō tātou papa hoepa, and even just around the pātai that you've asked us, Kawiti, what does mātauranga open up for us as whānau? I remember when he would give his gems and his kōrero tuku iho, there was never a price that was put on it. It was always strength-based understanding, and the things that he would provide for his tauira were kōrero that they could take away and then shape in a way that would be collective responsibility and collective healing for everybody that was privileged enough to learn beside him. Long-term thinking, he was obviously thinking about mokopuna and our future generations. This is probably just stuff that's already been said by the rest of the whānau, but yeah, that's just my ruahiniti this time.
Kia ora tēnei. Ai whakaro anō?
I don't think I can add too much. Just the fact that mātauranga gives us a much broader understanding of well-being. When we have dominant health systems who tend to focus on individuals, risk factors, treating illnesses, those things are important, but mātauranga kind of invites us to think beyond that and consider relationships, our relationships to whānau, to whakapapa, to whenua, to asua, and future generations as well. And examples of mātauranga like whakatauki remind us that well-being isn't just about avoiding illnesses, it's about living well, it's about belonging, contributing, and maintaining balance in the world around us. So mātauranga kind of gives us a strengths-based lens rather than focusing on the deficits or what's wrong. It asks us to consider the strengths, the resources, the knowledge, and the relationships that already exist within us and in our communities and our whānau.
Beautiful. Tēnā koutou. Before we move, we've got some awesome pātai here, but I just wanted to ask this last question, which is around designing systems. So if we were designing systems around people rather than processes, what would need to change?
Am I still unmuted? I think systems and processes. I think it might have to start with our relationships, because systems, too often systems are designed around efficiency, outputs, transactions, but people don't experience well-being through transactions. They experience it through relationships, trust, belonging, and feeling valued. So a system like a caring system or a for the people system is one that sees the whole tangata or the whole person and not just the problem they're presenting with. It recognizes that health, education, housing, culture, identity, environment, and community are all interconnected with each other. And it means designing a system with people rather than for people. Whānau and communities are we're actually experts in their own lives. So we create space for their knowledge, their lived experiences, and their aspirations to shape those decisions. And that's where I think we will end up with better and more sustainable outcomes. Like our people flourish when we trust, when we invest in people's strengths and support their leadership and create opportunities for them to contribute. I think incredible things can happen. So a system that genuinely just cares is one that doesn't simply ask, like, how do we fix this? Or how do we fix this problem? It asks, what do people need to flourish, to thrive, and to live to their full potential? And then has the courage to invest in those things for the long term. So ultimately, I think the best systems are those that leave people with a stronger sense of connection to themselves, to their whānau, to their culture, and also to their future.
I just want to jump in here, and I kind of feel like the dichotomy of people and processes a bit less black and white than we might think. I think people are processes too. I don't think we're like these static discrete things. I think we're always in process. And so maybe the question is like, what is it that's compelling the process? And I think I understand where this question comes from, because we get into kind of the trick of getting stuck in processes in a way that's very mechanical. Like we're just going through the process just for the sake of going through the process. And I think like maybe reimagining what processes might be compelled by is an interesting thing to think about. So like, yeah, similar to what Chelsea said, is like, what is the need? Who gets to name the need in the moment? How are we creating conditions for needs to be like shared and received? So there, I think actually the process is a really powerful place. And just thinking back to Crystal's kōrero about systems, and that health emerges when our conditions are healthful, when they make us well. And I think every moment, like every space between two nodes, you know, like the space between any two relations is a space where a system can change. And I think we already have the words for this, in my opinion. Whanaungatanga is it's just like so simple. And it's like, what does it mean for us to be in good relation in this moment? And how can we, yeah, just be more embedded in the process and not so fixed on the outcome or where the process leads us. And furthermore, not running through the process to arrive at a certain place, but allowing the process to run its own course, essentially. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Tautoko. I think there's a couple of things that I was sort of wanting to allude to was around like your kōrero around whanaungatanga. Haylee, I think the other thing for me too was like in our kawa and tikanga, just being such a place for us to be able to lean into, where a lot of whānau actually, I think sometimes aren't able to connect the two into spaces outside of our marae or outside of our pai and our wahi, but they're actually present in a lot of spaces. And I guess I think about that as like, you know, the kawa in terms of, you know, that's kind of the tuapapa or the why, the framework around things, and the tikanga side is about how you put it into practice. And so our tupuna already knew how to maintain, I guess, mechanisms that allow us to really flourish and support the things that we're trying to achieve. And when I think about that in the Western systems sort of concept, like what has been said before, it's about, you know, trying to fix the people, whereas, you know, he whakaaro Māori or he whakaaro taketake makes us think about what we can do to strengthen all of those other areas that we discussed, the relationships between people, between place, between ahurea, between hapori, and what are the different kākano that need to be planted in order to make that, I guess, overall level of well-being flourish naturally across different spaces. So when I think about the systems that are in play at this time, our whānau are just constantly shape-shifting in the way that they need to make something applicable to the spaces that we're in. And so sometimes it's obviously not the greatest method, but I think about Te Aka Whaiora, for example. We got to a space of really trying to like get into a space, and then a new government came in and changed things. And what really happened was a shift from the ingoa Te Aka Whaiora to Health New Zealand first, Te Whatu Ora second name, and then the Hauora Māori Services Directorate. So within that space, I tonu rātou ki ngā whāinga i whakatakoto i a rātou i raro i te maru o Te Aka Whaiora. So regardless of what was sort of either gifted and taken away, everyone mobilized in the way that they needed to make sure that things could continue to happen across not only the sector, but in all of the different spaces that our whānau are. And I guess that sort of talks to the continuation of, you know, te whawhai. But then I refer back to and think to te kauhou or ngā waihonu i te pō, te ariki nui, and her kōrero about, you know, kia whakatakoto hea i era tuapapa e whā mo te taha ki te reo ki te tai ao me era tuahuatanga. And that provided a level of hope and direction that could actually just navigate across almost any space. And it was the actualization of what you actually wanted to intend to invest your time and energy into, that shifted across each of the spaces. So, you know, kei roto tonu i ngā kōrero tukuiho ngā mātauranga, o tira te reo Māori, like just within our language is a lot of the things that need to happen. And so to see that so easily shafted and pushed to the side in multiple places, but it doesn't actually affect our whānau and what our intention is to do in a lot of our spaces. So, yeah, koe taku ai apiti.
Tēnā koe, o tira tēnā tātou. There's a pātai here which kind of is similar maybe to the one we've just been talking about. I just fielding it in case there were any details. In your sector, where do you see current systems, policies or practices being shaped by Western assumptions, and what might shift if we approach those spaces from an Indigenous worldview instead? From what we've just talked about, is there anything else that pātai might evoke for you? And if not, paeana, but I just thought we'd check in there. Ki te kore paeana. All right.
I think just one thing is just like a really specific thing is I think we still need to cultivate those Indigenous ways of moving within our own people. I don't there's still so much to consolidate amongst ourselves before we kind of try to kind of face the Western systems head on, you know, and I think the benefit of doing that is that we know that our people who receive this knowledge, there's an obligation that they feel to ensure its continuity, whereas others may not feel that sense of obligation. And so, yeah, I think given, you know, all the things that we've talked about, he Waewae Taumaha, and it's like, what is the taumaha that we can actually let go of in this moment so that we can move with, you know, more nimble feet and with more lightness. Yeah.
Kia ora. Okay, I need to take pātai, and I was like, oh, cool, because, you know, kaupapa nui tēnei wā. Tēnā koe, Dr. Alex Barnes, reka ake nei ngā kōrero. What are some pitfalls and potential of AI in your work and vision? Probably ancestral intelligence, but also artificial intelligence.
Yeah. I'll set up here ka kōrero au mo etai o ene. I think one of the biggest things that I, you know, took away from Whai Awhitias was, you know, tērā kōrero, te hononga o te AI tūturu, ki te AI o Naione. And so their kōrero around, I think one of the biggest ones when she was, you know, ka hapa ia etahi o ngā hangarau, that the original source of io exceeds technology itself. And so, you know, she sort of went back to, you know, what are the strengths that she has in that space. And I think if I think about the AI in the technology sense, it's become a space of almost a space of information. But there's a difference between information and, you know, being able to acquire sort of wisdom and think about, you know, what you're actually gathering from that space, and how much you feed, how much of that are we able to tiaki in that process. And I think that's kind of a space that we're always thinking about. How do we actually tiaki mātauranga with the use of the current forms of technology? And I think it's never going to really be able to understand whakapapa and understand lived experience or the intuition or the tikanga or the other aspects that we have. But there are whānau across the motu who are trying to embed that into a new method or a new sort of data space. And, you know, ka mihi ki te kahui raunga, and what they're sort of doing to make sure that our data sovereignty systems are really strong to be able to look after that. And that's the idea of the combination of those two things, te AI tuturu a Māori nei, me te AI o te naia nei, and blending those two together in a way that's going to look after the different, not only kōrero, But I guess the real understanding of, hā tēnei mea, I roto i ngā mea katoa I roto I Te Ao Māori. And so the more I think about the connection between those two, the more I think about how we have an obligation, whether we like it or not, to be able to continue to tiaki that mātauranga in whatever sense that sort of is. And so our whānau are young ones who are coming through, who are probably quick to feed anything and everything into those spaces without probably even thinking about it. That's where I think it comes back to the kawa and tikanga whakaaro, within iwi, within whānau, within households, and how to really navigate that space. And so I think it's got so much potential, but the potential in it can also be in a direction that we don't necessarily want. And so, for us, it's really understanding that could really allow us to open up a doorway to a world that we don't actually want to be the future for us as Māori in the space.
I think Da kind of nailed it on the head with his kōrero there. But I think, I guess in terms of my area, like within Rangahau particularly, the biggest concern is data sovereignty, because our knowledge, stories, and language are increasingly being fed and typed into AI systems, often without consent or awareness of the communities they kind of belong to. And tino rangatiratanga over our own knowledge has to extend into digital and AI spaces as well. And I think, we just need, I guess, frameworks to protect that. And I think they're still catching up to that. But the likes of Te Huku Media, they're doing some amazing things with AI tools, and they're creating it themselves, which is Mickey. But like Dar said, huge potential, and I think we can utilize our rangatahi, tauira Māori who are using it quite often, and using their awareness and youthfulness to kind of see what we can do with it. Because I think the question isn't, are we going to engage with it? I think that ship sailed. I think we're kind of going to have to. It's being forced on us. But it's whether we engage on our own terms, I think, is more of what we need to kind of direct our attention to more. And that just requires more conversations and exploring that world of the AI space.
It's so interesting. I feel like for me, AI brings up wider questions actually about what are our people going to AI for? And what is the need that is not being met that people assume AI can meet? And I think in many, many instances, that need is actually connection. And we've seen some pretty horrific things happening in the AI space across America in terms of the environmental impacts of AI. There's a potential data center being built in Invercargill, to my knowledge, that's currently being protested against. I think tuatahira me whakaroa ke ki ngā iwi taketake, and the lands where these data centers are going up with or without permissions from those people, and if we would be happy to have a data center kind of built on the doorsteps of our marae, taking water from our awa. And that's not to say that, because at the same time, I think our communities have a lot of need. And so I think it's really, we just, as users or non-users, we have a responsibility to be fully aware of the impacts of our use of technology, all technologies, not just AI, on the taiao. And I think for me anyway, an ethical use of it is to understand the underlying need, and that there are other strategies that we're using to have those needs met that maybe can reduce our reliance on AI over time, rather than it becomes something that's embedded in our processes. Right. Well, at the moment, given how much of an impact it has environmentally.
I like that whakaaro about opening up wider considerations, because it also kind of makes you think, like, back in the technology, the advent of technology, it's always increasing productivity by reducing the need for our input. And then what does that affect, tira tangata and our, like, what we do and how effective we are, and what is it that we wake up every morning to do, and all that kind of stuff. He nui te wānanga. Ai whakaaro ake anō, tuhi nema? No. Yeah, the AI wānanga can go on for ages. Hoi no, e tatahaere ana te wā, kia tātou. I think just to finish up with this last part, what is one shift in thinking, one shift in practice, and one shift in relationship that must be strengthened if we are to leave our mokopuna with healthier systems than the ones we inherited? Might be quite topical given the previous pātai.
Okay, maka pēr tīmata. Kia ora tātou. Ko tētahi e whakaaro ana e au is to shift from the mindset of trying to fix deficits, which I think that's how Toi Tangata was born, out of the idea that originally Te Hotu Manawa Māori was focusing on cardiovascular health, and the idea to shift to Toi Tangata was around the potential. And so I think and shifting to a strength-based and an aspiring direction of increased whakapapa and capability, I guess, across whānau, sort of creates that mechanism to open the doorway to what truly could be achieved. And so I think for the most part, we've continued, and we really, the goal is to really put ourselves out of a tūranga. Like Toi Tangata, if Toi Tangata doesn't exist and Health New Zealand doesn't exist, then we've kind of achieved what we need to achieve because our whānau are well. And so I think it's one of those whakaaro and shifting and moving our own goalposts for once, as opposed to having them moved for us. And so when I think about that, I think about, the one practice that might be able to support that is a longer intergenerational investment of what things could sort of look like. And so our Māori nei, we're thinking a lot longer than a contract period, than a political cycle, than a reporting period. Like, a lot of our kaupapa are based on 50 to 100 years worth of, ngā uri o Ngāti Haua, what are they going to be doing in 100 years' time? And then what do we want to achieve in that time? Ka pēhea mātou e whaiwhai ngā ara kia tūwhera tērā. And I guess that sort of leads me to the next step in terms of what's the one relationship. Kia nei ko te tai ao, and I think that's probably a massive piece that we've sort of advocated for in the past and now, in terms of our strategic direction, shifting into some of these spaces. Ka iara, ko ngā kōrero a Chrissy mā me te kāhui rā, ko mātāmua ko te tai ao, mātāmuri ko te tangata. And so kua huri te kei o te waka o toi kia aro ki tērā tūāhuatanga, ki te whakaaro o te hononga ki ngā whetū, ki ngā wai, ki ngā maunga, o tira ki ngā whakapapa o ngā mea katoa. And so we know that the well-being of our whenua has a direct correlation to us as tangata. And I think there's a small population that continue to make that shift in their localized environments to ensure that they are able to be kaitiaki and make sure that is pumping in their spaces. But mo koutou, mo mātou e noho taone nei he rereke te tūāhuatanga o tērā. We are going back home to do those things, a lot of us. But you're also called upon to do that in your whāngai environments, if you belong to, marae in as a mātāwaka in spaces as well. So kia nei, pēra ki ngā whakaaro o ngā tupuna ne, i whakatō kākano, and ka kore rawa rātou e kite i ngā hua o tērā kākano. And so I think it's just really navigating a space of understanding that we might not see some of the shifts that we really want to see in the time that we're going to be here, but the challenge is for us to be able to take some of those steps to ensure that the next lot can take on the next phase of what some of those things could look like, so they can, you know, sit under the shade of that rākau and eat that hua mai i rā wāhi. So I think those are the top three things that came to mind for me i roto i taua pātai.
Tāua kara. Toi Tangata Hui.
I'd have to agree with Da, especially about the deficit thinking. I think I would really love the shift in understanding that our communities aren't broken, or we're trying to fix a brokenness, because we're actually really resourceful, we're really knowledgeable, and we carry generations of knowledge about how to live and how to live well, how to care for each other. And I think if we just take that, our systems would look completely different. It's a shift in practice, the second part. Might be controversial, but I think we just need to slow down. I honestly think we just need to slow down a little bit, because I think one of the biggest things we're doing that's damaging us the most is we're moving way too fast. We're rushing through consultations, we're skipping relationship building, we're trying to implement things that we don't even understand, you know, and kaupapa Māori mahi requires a different pace. And I think I'm getting this whakaaro simply off my PhD journey, which has taken a really long time, but coming to the end of it, I think that was a blessing in disguise. Or that was just what I was supposed to do. Yeah, slowing down can, and I'm also very much like that, trying to speed things up, but I think that's definitely something that whānau can implement a little bit more, and we could potentially conceive different outcomes. But I know society challenges and the communities we live in makes it a little bit more challenging to do so. But I think if we can do that, that'll be really awesome. Yeah.
I really love how you sit there, Tohina. It made me thought, man, why are we so fast as human beings? Oh, because we've got short lives. But then our tupuna like had this probably shorter lives, but they were like, you know, but their horizons were longer because of whakapapa. Hey, and if you're thinking about like the paradigm, Western paradigm we live in now, like e hara i te mea ko te whakapapa tētahi o ngā tū papa o te noho o te ira tangata, like mai te ira tangata ki te ira atua, and then haere ake nei. So I think that's also a really important thing to remember as our kind of paradigms, we feel the crunch. Because, you know, if you're like, nah, sweet, I'm 7 generations or longer into the future, then it doesn't really matter how fast or slow you go now. Tērā tuahuatanga. Hoi anō. There was this amazing graphic I saw. It was like takes a million, like 40,000 people to create you 10 generations from you up. Like the idea that we're alone and our tupuna like aren't us and we're not them is just crazy. Hoi anō. I think anyway, wāhi, unless he tāpiritanga, tā tētahi atu, he wāhi pai tēnei, ki te hakatare i te aho o ngā kōrero, me te mihi tonu ki a koutou. Ngā ringaringa me ngā waewae o tēnei kaupapa rangatira o Toi Tangata, tēnā koutou. Thank you so much for adding to the kāpura of the wānanga of your own hui ātau here. It's awesome to see and hear the faces and the voices of the people on the ground doing the mahi within the whānau of Toi Tangata. Nō reira, tēnei mātou te mihi a ke kia koutou, tēnā koutou.